Hey everyone, welcome to the second StarCraft 2 video where we talk about the Roach opening against Terran. In the last video we talked a little bit about what exactly you're going to do when you don't scout gas in your opponent's main base, when he goes for command center first or goes for barracks into expand. The question in the last video that remained unsolved was of course always, what are you actually going to do when he goes into gas? Because then he has a lot more options. He can go into Reapers, he could try to scout what's happening in your own main base, he could go into tanks, could go into Hellions, or could go into Banshees. So today we're going to talk about what you do when you see with your drone in your opponent's base that he is getting a refinery, that he is going into gas. So let's just jump right into the game. We once again have a match of Hyun that will just be the example of the day to see how you deal with this variation of the Roach push that we talked about the last time. Looking at the game, we have Hyun once again to the bottom left, and this is Neoplanet S. It's a little bit of a different map from what we've seen in the last replay. The map itself doesn't make a huge difference here. It's still a two-player map. I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens if you are playing on a four-player map later on, but let's focus a little bit on the scenario right here. We have the Overlord immediately heading out for Hyun. You can see that this is the new skin for the Overlord. You can get the skin as a reward if you reach level 20 with Zerg. So he's heading up to the top, trying to aim for this cliff over here. And this Overlord is going to become important and quite a bit. But besides that, everything is going as planned, as he did in the last game. He's going into the Overlord at 9 supply once again. That's the 10th drone, and the 10th drone is also what is going to scout as soon as it pops. That's going to happen in just a few seconds, and then we'll have a little bit of a look what the Terran player does. So the drone is heading out. Overlord is here, the second one, and Hyun immediately starts to build additional drones. Droning up until 15 supply, and then going to get the hatch first right over here. That doesn't change. It doesn't change at all. The Terran player in this case is still in his main base, currently working at his wall, putting down the barracks, and what he will do now is go into gas. And this is the scenario that we talked about in the last game, in the last VOD. What happens if the Terran player doesn't go for one barracks into expand, but decides to go for Reaper opening, which is really common. I think the most common strategy in Zerg versus Terran for the Terran player is currently going Reaper into Hellions and then expand. So currently the drone is on its way. In the main base we already have the gas being taken by by the Terran player, and Hyun just took his hatch first and is still now adding those additional drones. The drone is now in the main base trying to harass the SCV a little bit, but you can really see that the next thing that Hyun wants to do is to find out what exactly is going on. So he moves in and he scouts the gas immediately, sees what's going on and moves down again a little bit and wants to escape now. And this is already where we have the first differentiation from what we've seen the last time. So Hyun scouts the refinery, and he knows, well, you're not going into one barracks into expand. So he knows that a most likely opening at this point in time in Heart of the Swarm is going to be Reaper. It could also be a transition just going straight into the factory, maybe work with a drop, a Widowmine drop, or even go into Cloaked Banshees. So what he does here is not take the gas right away. The first thing that he does is at the spawning pool. And at this point he's still producing quite a lot of drones, so he's just going with the hatch first into a very economy based play at the beginning, not adding the gas just yet, but only the spawning pool. The reason for this is quite simple. Hyun cannot prevent the Reaper from getting into his main base. That simply doesn't happen. If your opponent doesn't go for gas, you know that there won't be a Reaper, so there is no way that the Terran player can just hop onto the high ground. The only thing that he can do is send an SCV in over here. And if you have the two early Zerglings that we talked about and the Queens out, then the Terran player just can't get in and scout your gas. But as it is, Hyun knows there might be a Reaper, so I have to be careful. If he scouts what I'm doing, then he will prepare accordingly, and I want to delay that scout for as long as possible. I might not be able to prevent it, but I at least have to try to delay it. So that's the reason why he doesn't add the gas right now. He's just going for the spawning pool, and besides that he's doing what he did in game number 1, which we just covered a few days ago, where we were talking about the opening when the Terran player does not get gas. Reaper is going to be the weapon of choice for the Terran player, building it as we speak, and now the Overlord is just moving in. And at this point, the Overlord is just trying to have a quick look of what exactly happens. Look where it positions itself. It just sees everything that goes down the ramp. It sees the SCV, so the SCV knows now there is an Overlord, and if there was a Marine first instead of a Reaper, the Marine would now try to take down the Overlord, but the Overlord can always escape onto that high ground. Overlord sees the Reaper though. And with a Reaper, he knows, okay, you go into an expansion and you go into a Reaper play. And this also forces a reaction of Hyun, and this is exactly what we have to talk about next. So let's just pause the game again and look a little bit at what's happening here. The Overlord scouted the command center. The command center could also be on the high ground. But anyways, you could attack. So that doesn't really matter all too much. If you see the command center, even better. Know everything that's going on. But the more crucial thing for this build is you've seen the Reaper. So you always want to have a little bit of a look at what's happening at your opponent's base. And usually when you look at... Usually in every map that you have in the map pool, there's always a bit of a cliff somewhere where you can hide the Overlord in case there is no Reaper first, but a Marine. You have to be very, very careful that you don't lose the Overlord, because if you lose the Overlord, the whole strategy will completely fall apart as you are suddenly supply blocked, and it's very, very difficult to pull that off. But the information is really important, knowing that there's a Reaper. Because if there is no Reaper, then you can take your gas right away. If you see an opening with a Marine, it's much easier for you to just hide your gas. In this scenario, as you can see in the main base, he knows, okay, you have gas, you have a barracks, you might go into a Reaper, therefore I don't get my extractors. He waits, sees the Reaper, and now goes into 6 additional Zerglings and goes into the double queen. So this part doesn't really change. He drones up quite heavily, but in this scenario he only drones up to 18 supply. Remember, at 18 supply the next Overlord pops, so right now he has 3 Overlords. So basically what you do is a very similar build from what we've seen the last time when he scouted no gas. You get your first Overlord, you drone up all the way up to 18, and then when the pool is ready you get double queen, and in this scenario you get 6 Zerglings instead of 2. The 6 Zerglings and the 2 queens have one job. The one job that they have is to make sure that the Reaper is not getting any scouting information. And remember that with the strategy that we play, we go into 3 additional Overlords, we hit 28 supply, and this leaves us with 52 supply once the Overlords spawned. So the only thing that you really need is the first injects with the queens. That means when those queens pop, you use the first energy for an inject over here, inject in the main base, and then you are basically free to roam the map with the queens and try to chase that Reaper away. Of course, in an ideal world, you always want to make sure that you hit the next injects too, so that your transition is a little bit smoother, but for the original opening and the push, only the first inject is really crucial. So let's just see what Jan is going to do from now on. We have the Reaper now on its way. The Overlord has the scouting information to the top right, is now moving back to the cliff. The Reaper is going into the main base. Hyun is getting the Overlords, the next one. And here we go. Reaper trying to do a little bit of damage. The Lings immediately trying to chase it down. Terran players trying to chase it away. And now the Queens are nearly there. And this is the time we are waiting for the Queens to actually be in a position where they can defend. So right now the Reaper is still being chased, Hyun is droning up, building drones, nothing out of the ordinary, droning, and bam, here we go. The Reaper in this scenario actually dies. That's something that you will most likely not be able to achieve if your opponent is decent. But the timing that Hyun chose here to get those double geysers out, he goes into double extractor right now, is exactly when those queens pop. So the Reaper might actually be able to see one extractor. But even that is not really a big deal. If he only sees one extractor, yeah, whatever. I mean, he knows you're taking gas, so what? You're most likely going into speed, you might go into an earlier layer tech. He doesn't know what's going on. He didn't scout a Roach, he didn't scout the double gas, so even if he sees that gas, which wasn't even the case in this scenario, it's absolutely fine. So you place down those 2 extractors once that the queens are out, basically at the same time. Then you inject with the queens, and then you can chase the Reaper away if it is still there, with the help of those Zerglings, or even there might be a second Reaper, for all we know. So Hyun at this point takes the double gas, the Reaper is down, which helps him even more. He drones up, once again, up to 28. As you can see, we have now 20 the drones in general. We have 6 Zerglings, so he needs to get a few additional ones. He goes up to 30 supply overall, and then he saves lava. Gets the double gas, goes with 3 drones into each geyser, and added the Roach Warren at the same time that he took the gas, just a second later. So that's what you basically do once you know, okay, my opponent is most likely not going to scout this. Also note the placement of the Roach Warren. I can guarantee you, if Hyun would not have killed that Reaper, the Roach Warren would be somewhere down here, or maybe down here, just to hide it even a little bit more. What the Terran player does now is a very similar opening. He goes now into the Hellions that we already assumed he would build. And Hyun, of course, once again, this time he's even going up to 60 supply with the Overlords. Actually, I think he could have not... He could have just saved one more Overlord and would have been able to produce a few more Roaches. But in this scenario, the Hellions now want to sneak in. Hyun is building his Roaches once again. The Queen is already at the front, trying to make sure that the Hellions don't get in here, that they don't get the scouting information early on. And let's look at this. He's even pulling the second Queen down. So we have the second Queen only with the first inject, as already mentioned. Then he puts it down onto the low ground, and Hyun is not immediately rallying those Roaches across the map. He waits at the bottom here until the initial Roaches are at the same place, and then he walks with all of them across the map. So the two Queens at the front are just means of trying to deny the scouting information for as long as possible. In this game it actually works out very well for Hyun. We're going to talk about this in just a second. But usually what would happen here is that you have your Roaches, the Terran player at one point will eventually see the Roaches, but that's not a big deal, guys. He even goes into a third command center. This is really good for Hyun, but that's not usually the case. So even if he sees your Roaches, even if he starts to build bunkers here, remember what we talked about in the last video, that's completely fine. You move in and you do as much damage as possible. You start taking the SCVs away and you just want to get a little bit of a head start in the game. So don't freak out if your strategy is actually scouted at this point in time. That's completely normal. But to go about the timings once again. So Hyun, when he has those two Queens, he drones up to 18. He goes into the 6 Zerglings and into the 2 Queens as soon as the spawning pool is done. Tries to make sure that the Reaper doesn't get any scouting information. Once the Queens are out, he takes double gas. He goes into the Roach Warren, and then he completely drones up to roughly 30 supply. 28 supplies when you have to build that additional Overlord, and even when the Overlord is out, he builds a few additional drones, and those additional drones make up for the extra Zerglings that he had to build. And then he just waits. He saves up the lava, and as soon as those lava pop and the Roach Warren is done, he builds those Roaches. This build is a little bit slower than the build when he does not scout gas. You will see that we have now 6 minutes and 28 seconds and the Roaches are already out on the map. With the build that we covered the last time, the Roaches are out a little bit faster. The Roaches are out on the map at roughly the 6-minute mark. So this delays everything a little bit, and this is just the adjustment you have to make when you see my opponent opens up with gas. There are a few other builds that the Terran player could use here. He could not go into Reapers, but could decide up here, okay, I'm going into Banshees. So suddenly you are faced with a Banshee that is going to defend this. Once again, same thing true, don't freak out. Just attack, it's fine. Your Roaches are gonna die eventually. That's something that you can't prevent. And you will not in every game be able to kill the Terran player. Your goal is to cripple his economy, to do damage. So even if there's a Banshee, go in, take down as many SCVs as you can, keep your calm, macro behind it, and make sure that you just achieve what you went for. Another Reaper is coming in, wants to the scouting information, and now Hyun is lucky. Both of those units, all 3 of them, actually go to the bottom right, so he can just circumvent all the units and go in. But this also means that he can't defend against these Hellions. The Hellions are moving in here, and you can really see him pull the Roaches away. He's like, well, you go for Reaper Hellion, you will lose a lot, and even if I lose my Harvesters here, that's gonna be fine. So he's losing a lot of workers, he's only defending with those Queens, will get additional Zerglings out here to deal with them. This is a scenario where he just says, I'm gonna trade. I'm definitely gonna trade with you. So he has the Roaches now on the move, and you can really see the Terran player already scouted it. But what can he do? He doesn't have a lot. His units are at the bottom left, so the Roaches are now just going to stream in. The bunker is already done. Here we have some Widow Mines. The Widow Mines are trying to do some damage. He leaves one Roach at the front, and this is basically the sacrifice of pawn that he has in here. This is trying to tank the damage, but even those Widow Mines don't do a lot, and now suddenly the Terran player, well, he realizes he can't do anything here, and he's gonna lose way too much. He's losing his economy, types GG, and leaves the game. But let's focus a little bit on what we saw here and about what could happen. As you can see, Hyun lost actually 10 Harvesters. So the Hellions that were there did a lot of damage, and they were eventually killed when those Zerglings spawned. This is really just about keeping your calm. When you realize that you're on your way with your Roaches and your opponent has a few Hellions over there, you try to take them down with the next the next wave of units. Your initial roaches just go across the map when they are in this position and try to do their damage, because they are the one thing that the Terran player isn't prepared for. With all those Hellions, he invested a lot of resources into these units that are trying to attack you, but you have a very strong force that can deal very well with Hellions, and it can deal very well with Reapers. It can also take a few shots of those Widow Mines. The one thing they can't deal with is, for example, tanks. So once again, just not freak out. You go up, and if there are a few Widow Mines, you will take a shot or two, but then the Widow Mines are in cooldown, and you have enough time to break through the wall, to go into the base, take down a potential bunker, and do the damage to the SCVs. So this is basically the second video that we have right now, where you adjust a little bit to what happens when you see gas. There are of course a lot of things that the Terran player could do with gas. We talked about it. You could go into Banshees, but the original idea of this build will always stay the same. The initial roaches, you sacrifice them, you do damage, you try to cripple your opponent's economy, and while you do that, you drone up behind and you go into lair tech. You try to go into the next phase of the game if your opponent doesn't die to this push right away. So much for the variation of what you are going to do when you see gas in your opponent's base. One thing that we didn't talk about just yet is what you do when it's not a 2-player map, but if when it's a 4-player map. There are several things that you can do. You can, first of all, just be like, well, this is a big map, so I just assume that my opponent is not going into gas, but that he will try to be a little bit greedy. You can gamble, can just open with one of those two variations. If you want to roach push, you can always send out the scout and just try to get into your opponent's main base. You can check the timings of the second depot and try to figure out if he was able to take gas before that. But you can always open with a different strategy as well. You don't have to necessarily go into a roach push. This can be a strategy that you just use on a 2-player map against your opponent. On a 4-player map like Whirlwind, for example, you can always gamble a little bit and be like, well, this is a big map, so he's most likely going into a command center first in an early expansion, not going into gas. But you can always open with a different opening. And this is one of the things that I will definitely talk about in the future. Probably not the next week, but maybe in a week or two, talk a little bit about what you can do if you don't want to push out early. If you want to play, for example, a very economy-heavy style, when you want to go into an early 3rd base, maybe save it with queens, without gas, going to 6 queens and trying to be a little bit more defensive in the beginning. So all these things, that's something that we're going to talk about very, very soon. But not today. Today it was all about the roach push and about what you can do when you see gas. I feel with those two variations of the same build order, you now have a really strong weapon at your disposal that you can use against Terran players on ladder. Let me know how you fare with that, and if you want to know about future strategies that we are going to talk about, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video.